Right, Councillor Bridham, I think this is your first time presenting to the committee. We won't be too appallingly rude to you, but you have 5 minutes and that's it. Councillor Bridham.
I was expecting you to be quite rude, actually, Peter. Thank you, Chair. I think it's important to state at the outset that initiatives to tackle rough sleeping are incredibly important. It's a subject that both Councillor Cook and I, as ward councillors, care very deeply about, and we're supportive of the government's approach on this issue, in particular its willingness to support local authorities in tackling it. And indeed, we were also initially supportive of this particular project on that basis, on the basis that residents would be fully and properly consulted. It's therefore a matter of regret to both of us that the council has so badly lost the confidence of the local community through what I regard to be a fairly shambolic process. I think made all the more disappointing by the fact that it is the council's own application as well. The first issue that I'd like to highlight is a lack of consultation with business. So the Linden Tree Nursery next door understandably have a few concerns, no doubt accentuated by the fact that they didn't feel they were consulted proactively enough. And indeed, as I understand it, council officers only met them after residents and us as ward councillors pointed this out. I've discussed the matter with the nursery over the last few days, and it's their view that the application does not take into account the operational needs of their business and also prejudices the activities of their operations. As I see it, this could contravene the Wandsworth local plan, specifically the general development principles set out over pages 288 to 289. And in light of the strength of feeling that we've all seen conveyed in the objections, they believe it will become much more difficult for them to attract customers and that current customers will leave. I know that they've checked with their insurers and discussed this issue with them, and unfortunately there's no cover for this situation, and as a result they believe it's quite likely that they will have to close. Now, the papers from tonight's agenda state that there is no evidence for this assertion, as comparable operational experience is not available for a location such as this. Now, forgive me if I've misunderstood, but the council's position appears to be that because there is no other example of this kind of initiative being placed in a similar location, the concerns about the viability of the nursery's business are therefore not valid. I don't think that's really a sufficient answer, and I think it's regrettable that these concerns have been dismissed rather out of hand, rather than addressed properly in a straightforward and direct fashion. One factor mentioned as favouring the site is that Lavender Hill Police Station is nearby, just up the road. Now, ostensibly, I think this seems very reasonable, but I'm afraid I don't really have much confidence in the council's ability to liaise effectively with the local police on this issue, given that the local police team heard of it was from us as ward councillors at a quarterly meeting of the Safer Neighbourhood team. Now, as I understand it, there have been no previous communication with the police on this particular issue. Similarly, whilst the consultation meeting at Battersea Arts Centre was, I think, an excellent idea, it should have happened well before it actually took place. It would also have been appropriate for me and Councillor Cook as the ward councillors to be invited. Instead, we only found out about the meeting from a resident too late for us to organise our attendance. Now, I know that this was not intentional at all, but I have to say it doesn't inspire confidence that the site is going to be well run. The information booklet that was distributed to residents was, I think, in some ways very helpful in setting out more detail and answering a few questions that people had. However, it was presented very much as a fait accompli, and it didn't mention that the hub required planning approval. Whilst I really don't think there's been any conscious attempt to prevent or minimise engagement from residents, I can understand why someone could reach that conclusion having read the booklet. Now, in light of all of this, it's therefore my view that the committee should reject this application and the council should explore other sites. Now, however, if the planning committee is, in spite of all these issues, still minded to approve the application, I would ask that the following conditions be imposed. The first is that there should be no building work between noon and 3 p.m. each day. That's because these are the core hours when the children at Linden Tree Nursery tend to be asleep. The second is that the formal consultative mechanisms that have been discussed be included in the planning conditions. So in my view, that should include a hotline set out in the planning conditions, and also I think a set cadence of meetings, perhaps quarterly, which will allow residents' concerns to be addressed in a timely fashion. And then the final point is that actually the planning permission should, in my view, be temporary planning permission and will come up for renewal after 6 months of the site being in operation. And what I believe that would do is it would give the committee the opportunity to consider whether the site works in practice, not just in theory, and also give residents a degree of reassurance that there's a formal mechanism and a waypoint for considering whether the site works as it should. I thank the committee for their time.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for the very balanced way you put what is obviously a tricky application from your point of view as a ward councillor, and indeed from all points of view. I would normally at this point ask the local planning officer, Nigel Granger, to give the position as far as the planning department is concerned. But Nigel's son had a serious accident just over a week ago and is not well, and Nigel's with him tonight. I'm sure the committee would wish us to send our best regards to Nigel and hope for his son's reasonable recovery, if you could do that, please. But in his absence, we have very capable, of course, Miss Brew Hammond, Araba. Would you care to put your recommendations to the committee?
Yes, good evening. My name is Araba Brew Hammond, and I'm a senior planning officer and the case officer on this application. I did prepare a quick overview of the site just to run through some of the key planning considerations before potentially, offering comments back to the concerns raised. So this is item 4 on the agenda, and it's at 201 to 203 Lavender Hill, and it's a change of use from existing office buildings to a rough sleepers assessment hub of sui generis classification. In terms of the site context, the application site, which is the red star on the map, is a currently vacant mid-terrace 4-story office building with an existing basement level, and it's located on the south side of Lavender Hill. The building was most recently occupied by the Wandsworth Council Leaving Care Service, but has had historic uses as a community centre with some accommodation for the elderly in the 1960s, 1970s. In terms of the local context, the site is located just outside the Clapham Junction town centre boundary, which is the blue line on the map. And there are some heritage assets of note within the local area, including the Battersea Arts Centre, which is grade 2 star listed, hashed out in pink opposite the red star. And it also falls within the Town Hall Road Conservation Area. And the Clapham Common Conservation Area is also further to the southwest. The conservation areas are the areas outlined in yellow on the map. So the proposal will primarily involve internal alterations and refurbishment works in connection with the change of use. As set out in section 2 of the officer's report, the proposal does not include any new external alterations or extensions to the facades of the main building. Therefore, the proposed development is not considered to have a material impact on the setting of the identified heritage assets nearby. These are some of the existing site street views. The site adjoins mixed-use buildings along the terrace with some commercial and educational uses at ground floor and basement floor levels. So from the photos, you can see that the sites are the 2 white storefronts in the middle. And of note, the nursery is directly to the left at ground and basement levels, and then there are residential users above. On the west side, which is the right side, after the Mysore Road Junction is a 6-story mixed-use contemporary building with estate agents' offices at ground floor and residential flats above. The areas to the south and north of Lavender Hill are predominantly residential in nature. As previously mentioned, there's not going to be any external alterations or extensions to the main building. However, the bulk waste and recycling will be located to the rear of the site. So new metal gates are proposed to the rear alley behind the site to restrict access except for in case of waste collections and emergencies such as fire exit. The core operations of the hub will be run from ground floor levels and above with cycle parking and a laundry room at the basement level. The hub will contain 9 short stay rooms across first and second floor levels with meeting rooms and staff offices located at ground and third floor levels. The principle of the loss of the existing office use has been set out in the officer's report. This sets out how the application site is not included in any areas with policy protections for existing office floor space. It's also noted that the nature of the hub would incorporate a mix of uses, including office and meeting rooms with assessment of rough sleepers. It's therefore acknowledged that the hub would retain some services which will not vastly differ from its former use as an advice center and offices for the leave-in care service. As set out in the report, the proposed sui generis use would also meet the policy requirements of policy LP 31, which relates to specialist and supported housing. It's acknowledged that the initial application submission did not include sufficient detail on the proposed hub use and management. As such, officers requested for further information in relation to the nature and the operation of the site, as well as further details in terms of the internal layouts, accessibility, and standard of accommodation proposed. Consultation letters were then reissued once all this additional detail was received, and the relevant responses have been outlined in the report. After reviewing the information, the proposed hub has been identified to serve an urgent local need, serving as a local coordinator facility to address a gap in homelessness outreach services and temporary accommodation provisions. The quality of the temporary accommodation has also been fully assessed in Section 4 of the officer's report and is considered to accord with the relevant amenity standards in terms of room sizes, layouts, wheelchair accessibility, disability accessibility, and communal facilities on the site. In terms of its location, the position of the site just outside the Clapham Junction town centre, an excellent PTAL of 6, affords occupants a wide range of local shop services and leisure facilities within walking distances and well-linked public transport options. The proposal is not a major application, nor does it provide self-contained permanent residential dwellings, and therefore it does not trigger any affordable housing requirements. A high number of objections have been received in relation to the application. However, it's noted that the majority were received in the initial consultation period, where the concern was expressed over the lack of any pre-application consultation and discussions with local residents and businesses. The applicants, the Wandsworth Housing Department, has since engaged in further consultation with local residents, including holding a 3-hour public consultation event in December 2023. In line with the management of the proposal, the impacts of the neighboring amenities and the impact on local businesses and on their operations has been fully assessed in Section 3 of the officer's report, and it has been found as acceptable. In terms of the initial management plans for the hubs, it's indicated that well-considered strategies in terms of managing noise, safety, security within the local area have been proposed, and officers have recommended conditions which would secure privacy and amenity for neighboring properties, including Condition 3, which restricts the use of the rear garden area for any amenity purposes or access to residents, Condition 4, to obscure glaze any of the east-facing windows which would directly overlook the neighboring nursery, and also Condition 5, to restrict the use of any amplified sound to limit noise disturbance. Condition 6 has also been recommended in terms of the installation of CCTV in locations to the front and to the rear of the site for security purposes. And this is in line with consultations with the Met Police designing out crime officer. And the applicant has also outlined that they have met with the Met Police Inspector for Battersea as well, to work with them moving forward on the application. It has also been outlined that the on-duty staff on that hub will have specific responsibilities to uphold the safety and well-being of staff and residents, as well as neighboring residents, including conducting daily room checks, regular floor inspections, and walkarounds in the immediate area. As part of the rules for the hub, it's also proposed that any undue noise and disturbance and unruly behavior will be strictly monitored. If any such behavior is noted, warnings and evictions would be issued in line with the draft eviction procedure, which has been presented within the application report. In terms of managing the impact on local community and continuing an open communication with local residents and businesses, the applicant has outlined that there would be a hotline provided. The details of this has been set out in the application report, and also a local residence form has been set out in the application report, which have been included as reports to be secured as details under condition 2. These avenues would allow for the local community to be informed of project updates and expected timescales, and will also serve as a platform for local residents to ask questions and raise concerns during the lifetime of the application. So in conclusion, the material planning considerations have been set out within the officer's report. Then the hub has been shown to cater to an identified need and would have an acceptable standard of location in an appropriate edge of town centre location. The retained building form would not distract from the local streetscape, nor would it harm the setting of the nearby heritage assets. And subject to the recommended conditions, the proposed development should not cause any significant harm to the amenities of neighbouring properties, and all waste, transport, sustainability and fire safety impacts have been considered and found as acceptable.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before I open it up, whilst people are having time to think about the details of that, can I just ask about 3 conditions that Councillor Pridden suggested? First of all, in terms of the construction works, all the work involved in this change is interior to the building. Is that not correct?
Yes, that is correct. So the proposal does not include anything external to the building form, but in terms of the internal refurbishments, basically these will be, reviewed and will form part of the environmental health legislation in terms of building control.
What the council suggested was a condition that there was no building work between 12 midday and 3 p.m, when understandably the nursery kids are doing what all sensible people should be doing, up I never do, and having a snooze. I'm not sure that would be practical, that in a working day, which presumably goes from, 8 till 4 or something like that, for most construction workers. Do you think that this, because it's all internal, that it can be contained? What do you reckon on that condition?
Because building works fall outside of the planning process,
Okay,
it's not something
enough.
we could condition.
Okay, well, we'll consider that. You did mention that was going on to his second point, which is about consultation. You did mention clearly that there had been some movement on that, including a hotline. I heard that correctly, didn't I? Okay. And the third bit he was particularly mentioned was a temporary permission, 6 months. Now, I'm not asking you to give, but like your opinion on that, I would have thought that 6 months is really unrealistically short for a department to set up a facility like this. I can understand the reason for having a temporary permission. I'm not necessarily supporting that as a condition, but I understand the reason. But 6 months shortly is unreasonable, would you not think?
I believe because of the way we've assessed the application in terms of it being a permanent use of the site, it was not our consideration that a temporary condition would be required or relevant in this case, because suitable management strategies have been outlined for the site that would manage noise, privacy, and any other impacts to local businesses. It was not considered that that would be necessary. That was our opinion.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure we've got. I'm sure we all understand that that this is a very serious problem. That is homelessness and how we handle homelessness. It's also a very serious community concern. And therefore, if we're going to make this work properly, we want the very best possible treatment of it by this committee and in every other way. But I open up to questions and comments from anyone at all. Councillor Lavender.
Chair, just take your guidance. I mean, I got some comments on the conditions Councillor Pridham mentioned. I just want to explore those, but I also have other questions about the application. So shall I do the conditions-related questions first? Just on the question of afternoon working, and I recognize internal works are different from external works, but just as an example, we had recently some works done to our own flat, all internal, but actually some internal works are noisy. They just have to be, by nature of the things. And so I wonder whether, if the blanket ban is not practical, whether a mechanism could be considered whereby any noisy aspects of internal fitting out is excluded from the afternoon work. I mean, it's a works management thing. I appreciate planning may not be the vehicle for it, but I think the council, as the applicant in this case, might want to take a lead in being a good neighbour when it comes to this thing. So I've just explored that. And the second
I should say, by the way, sorry, I should have said that we have, as I'm sure some people know, but we have council observers here closely associated with the working of the application, so I'm sure they'll take note of what's being said.
So it'd be worth hearing from Mr. Worth if what I'm suggesting is deliverable. The second suggestion I'd like to make is that in my own ward, and you will be familiar with it, the Gressenhall Road Mosque created quite a stir when it came for various planning approvals here. And again, through both the council's intervention and the mosque's willingness, a community forum was set up, which regularly met, and it was not necessarily a forum where the council was necessarily represented, but it created the platform for councillors, for the mosque community, and for the local neighbourhood community to sit around. And whether that is something that, once again, Mr. Worth's good offices could explore and emulate, because I think it'll go some way towards strengthening the hotline and the quarterly meetings already suggested. And the final point on that was that I think the suggestion was not that those quarterly meetings and hotlines been offered, that's right, but it's whether it could be turned into a condition so that it's a planning requirement rather than the goodwill of the applicant. And I wonder whether that's something that this committee should consider.
Sorry, do you want to move on?
So those are my 3 points about the 3 points about the condition. Just turning on to the actual facilities, and perhaps this is where Mr. Worth might be able to help. I looked at the plans and I see that there are 9 bedrooms, so I don't know what would be the average length of stay for each person, and whether the dining and kitchen facilities are adequate for the 9 people, whether that's, in a sense, considered to be adequate. So that's the kind of question about the internal facilities in there. The other question is the police suggested kind of a linkage with things like street pastors and so on, and whether that's been explored. The report is silent on whether there's any work done around it. And similarly, the police talked about CCTV, which would be picked up, but they talk about physical security. And I don't know what they mean, but I'm sure that that was set out to the housing team. So I wonder whether whatever physical security has been embedded in this plan has met the approval of the police. And my final point is really about the involvement of Richmond Council in this application. Now, I appreciate the council has a shared staffing arrangement and all of that thing, but this is actually providing a rich facility for Richmond in Wandsworth, and some local residents might say to the detriment of the local community. And I just want to understand an explanation for it as to why. Is it just simply because the funding is done by joint councils? And why is that done by joint council? Why could it not have been done by just Wandsworth in order to keep this Wandsworth facility as a Wandsworth facility. It's not as the homelessness is not a significant enough problem for it to be a sole single borough facility here and Richmond do their own.
Please don't take this amiss and get into one of our standard Ravi-Tony arguments, but I find that very amusing given a question coming from one of the main architects of the setup.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Don't rise. Any other specific questions or comments? Councillors.
I'd like to support the idea of restricting the noisy works between 12 and 3. I'm sorry, my name is Finna Ayres. I'm East Putney councillor. It's quite common that you have the word noisy put in front of works and that you have, in brackets, no use of power tools. I mean, it's really quite a common thing to see in a building contract with some restrictions. So I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to ask for. I have a separate point, which is not to do with whether I'm going to support it or not, because I am going to support it. I think it's a very significant and useful contribution to our services. And I think that adequate ameliorating actions have been taken to reduce some of the problems which will undoubtedly occur. My comment is about the planning, the building inside. I was absolutely furious to see that the smallest room of all the rooms is the female room. And I know you're all
No,
laughing.
sorry, that's not funny. It's very...
Not only is it the smallest room, but it has one corner taken off it with the existing fireplace, and the boiler is in this smallest room. I cannot understand how that escaped the attention of the planners. I think it's outrageous. I mean, the awareness of what you're providing and what it means, what you're doing, I mean, is horrible. So I'm very cross about that, and I think that there's quite an easy design solution to improving that wretched little corner, and I'm delighted to show you how it could be. Thank you.
I don't know whether I should declare an interest, but I have actually employed Finna as an architect. And I know she's very inventive about solutions of that kind, so people should note that. Anyone else? Councillor Humphreys.
Could we perhaps answer some of these questions before we move on to some more?
Well, no, because we're taking some, because they're general. If you allow me to, Councillor Humphreys.
As you wish, Chair. Councillor Guy Humphreys, Opposition Speaker and Councillor for Southfields in Putney. I wholeheartedly support the idea of the forum being somewhat more formally set up, principally because it gives them an opportunity to be more proactive in their discussions with the obviously understandably concerned businesses and residents nearby, rather than just issuing a bulletin. There's a bit more to it about it, and the hotline is something we frequently use, but it's kind of reactive, if you know what I mean, as far as responding to individual concerns. And I think if you had a forum, whether it's quarterly, as Councillor Prism suggested, or something like that, more formally set up, then it gives an opportunity for the hopefully words of it being the good progress being made to spread to the wider community, and also a wider forum for people to have those probably mutual concerns addressed in one place. I think, as Councillor Grinja said, the model that worked really well in Greshnall Road was something where a lot of the concerns that were initially raised found to be resolvable with the work, goodwill of both parties. So I'd hardly recommend that being more formalised, and I think it is a good idea to put it as a condition, as a specific kind of thing, is one thing. On the noisiness stuff, I'm in a bit of a cleft stick here, aren't I, being a contractor myself, so I get it both ways round. When you're working, it's true, internal stuff can be very noisy. So again, even if it's not possible to completely restrict works during those hours, anything that could be done, I think, to do that. And also, I think if there was stuff that was unavoidably going to happen, again, if that could be flagged up to the nursery particularly, so they can make arrangements to try to ameliorate it from their side as well. So proper dialogue on stuff like that, because because it is going to be impossible to manage that completely satisfactory to both sides. As you all know, with party walls and such, like you start drilling into a wall to do anything, it's going to reverberate throughout the whole building, and those old buildings, the acoustic properties aren't brilliant, so I think that's something that would be worthwhile doing. That's on that stuff so far. There was a suggestion, again, from the applicant, actually, which wasn't picked up by officers completely, which was interesting, about obscure glazing some of the windows. So we've heard that they're going to be obscure glazed on the side facing the south east, isn't it, I think, where facing directly onto the nursery. But there was also apparently an offer from the applicant to obscure glaze some of the other windows, I think south-facing windows that might have some possibilities for overlooking. And officers in the report took the view that that wasn't necessary because of the vulnerability of the residents and the fact that some of those were bedrooms. I could understand it perhaps with the bedrooms, but some of those rooms are kitchens, and I don't see any reason why the applicant's offering, we shouldn't take them up on their offer to obscure glaze those kitchen windows. Again, just in the nature of the fact that it has been something of a controversial thing, I think any gestures the applicant could do to assure residents that the council is doing the best it absolutely can in those circumstances to moderate things would be really helpful. On a more general point, I just wanted to ask about, a lot of work's gone into this. We all understand that and appreciate you put a lot of work into trying to make this work. We have to be honest, though, don't we? This is a first, really, for this kind of operation. Unless I'm wrong, I don't think there's anybody else doing that kind of thing. So, again, I'd like to hope that the council can be agile and flexible moving ahead with this thing. So however much well-made plans are made, sometimes things don't work out necessarily quite as you expect. As Councillor Greeny's comments about some of the police responses, it would be good to know that the council is willing to be flexible and moderate or change plans if things aren't working according to exactly how it is in reality.
Thank you. I'm sure we've all learnt a lot, and I'm sure the people in the Housing Department have learnt a lot too. The officers are eager to get in with some comments before we get run away. But Councillor Owens, you're all lined up ready. But
Well, I just wanted to pick up firstly on the hours of works. Noisy works are normally outside the hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. because that's when people are, at home. Building works tend to happen during the middle of the day. I don't think I've ever seen a contract which would say you can't do building works within the middle of the day. It wouldn't be able to be controlled through the planning process, but as you know, Mr. Worth and his team are here today. They might be able to come to some sort of arrangement directly where they inform the nursery at times when they're going to be doing noisy works, and there can be some sort of relation that way. On the point of the management plan is approved as part of condition 2 in accordance with the documents. If you feel that that is not sufficient, we could put that into a separate condition and have it as a separate work should be carried out in accordance with the management plan. That doesn't make a difference, but maybe it provides members with that extra security that we've got that extra condition on it. I think those are the ones I want to pick up. I think the other point, the earlier scheme had the ladies' room as the smallest. I think that's been amended out, but I'll confirm that with Ms. Brew-Hammond if that's okay.
Yep. Sorry, yeah, that's fine. So in terms of the standard of accommodation, the female-only room has been amended out, and now all the rooms are gender neutral. I believe this was the first illustration of the scheme because I believe research has shown that the female-only offering was not as high as male rough sleepers. However, now all rooms will be gender neutral to allow for females to sleep in any of the rooms, should they be a higher number. In terms of the obscure glazing, yes, officers did consider the option of obscure glazing all the rear windows as suggested by the applicant. However, striking the balance between having some of these being habitable rooms and these vulnerable people having to stay in these much smaller rooms in comparison to permanent residential dwellings, it was considered that the views out of these windows would not be dissimilar from what are currently available from the office use of the site, and as well as other neighboring residential flats that have views over this nursery space. So it was considered that these rooms do not require obscure glazing to safeguard the existing privacy levels, given there's a lot of mutual overlooking. However, the option to obscure glaze, maybe some of the windows, such as the kitchen window, could be considered. But it is an opinion that these would not, views from the kitchen would not be much dissimilar from views from the office uses and the meeting rooms, which would already have views over the site. In terms of I believe the noise conditions have been discussed, but in terms of the physical security, I'll just touch on it a bit. We did secure metal gates at the rear of the site so that the whole of the rear of the site is also, physically secure. I believe the applicant has outlined that a number of the staff would be trained in terms of dealing with the residents that will be coming to the site. Whether a number of the staff would be security personnel in particular, I believe that might be a question best answered by the housing team. And in terms of the average lengths, the scheme has been outlined to be based on a 28-day target temporary model. So it's anticipated that would be hopefully the maximum stay. However, each case would be assessed in its own individual merits, and so there could be cases where that could be longer.
Have either you, Mr. Hammond, or Mr. Calder, got anything to say about the Richmond involvement?
I was going to then hand over to maybe Mr. Worth or Mr. Sheridan-Weller to sort of pick up on, firstly, the police issue and their relationship with the police, and then maybe pick up on the Richmond and Wandsworth and other examples coming forward of this, if that's okay with Chair and with members.
Members are happy about that, yes.
Hi, Michael Sheeran-Weller, Rush Sleeper Coordinator for Richmond and Wandsworth Councils. So yeah, just on the on referencing the question about interaction with the police, we actually met with the Chief Inspector for Battersea around the same time as the public consultation event in early December. Mr. Worth and I also attended the Safer Neighbourhoods panel, which was an online forum, which I think Councillor Pridham was also in attendance for, just to speak to local residents and involve the police. So we've done those two things.
Thank you. Now I had Councillor Justin.
Just on the SSA issue.
Mark Justin, Ward Councillor for Nine Elms. We're reading in the notes here that this will be the first rough sleeper hub in the borough. But what about other boroughs? I mean, I'd like to ask the officers, have they looked at other boroughs where there is a pre-existing rough sleeper hub? Because I would have said that it would be very helpful to find out how other people have got on with this kind of centre, nay, essential to have found out what other boroughs, and if there isn't one in the London borough, I'd stretch out further into other outer London. But for something that's new, how do we know that if the 500 objectors knew that there were several of these hubs across London and they found them running perfectly well, it would go a long way to allay their fears. So I would have said that some kind of investigation to other rough sleeper hubs, wherever they may be, would be actually essential in assessing this application.
Well, if it's the first, it can't be essential. I mean, if you see what I mean. But Councillor Owens, what your question is?
Yes, sorry, Councillor Owens, Northcote Ward. I didn't explain that earlier. Just a bit about, I'm picking up on Councillor Pridham's comments and then following the presentation. The consultation process. I actually did attend the residents' meeting, the 3-hour residents' meeting, and there were an awful lot of people there. And one of the reasons I attended is because this, the nursery that is affected and impacted by this also had parents in my own ward send their children there. I just didn't feel that in the presentation that was particularly alluded to. It was almost like, well, we had this consultation, we then had this meeting, it's all fine. I mean, I'm not entirely convinced that the businesses' concerns are addressed, and I'm not sure the consultation, which was very quick. I mean, we've had 500 objections, we might have had 1,000, but I'm interested on that. Thank you.
Did you want to come in, Mr. Gordon?
Yes, but I don't think we answered the SSA point before we moved on, and then we'll pick up the Councillor Justin's issue about other examples in London. I'll hand back to Mr. Worth to start with.
Thank you, Chair. So, dealing with the point about other schemes, there are a couple of long-running schemes which we have visited. Michael and his colleagues have been and visited them. There's one in Lambeth by Vauxhall Bus Station, which has been running for a long time. And I think from my knowledge, it's 40 rooms, so bigger than this. There's also another one called The Passage up in central London, in Westminster, that's been running for a long time as well. So we've gone out. A lot of the stuff you see here in terms of the management plan, the eligibility criteria, the house rules, if you like, have been plagiarised from their best practice. And also, we've been advised through this process by government officials at DLUC, Department of Levelling Up, etc., and they're rough sleeper specialists. So we think at this stage it is new to the borough, it's new to us, and I fully accept and apologise to the committee and the wider community, as we did previously, that the initial consultation was not what it should have been, and more than happy to own that one. We hope we've improved it through the events that have been described. So we've been out and we've seen other boroughs, and we will look to take their best practice and build on it. That was one point. On the sharing with Richmond, this is increasingly rough sleeper services are looked at on a sub-regional or even pan-London basis. Richmond obviously is, well, we also run the same services in Richmond on behalf of the SSA. And to an extent, when we bid for the funding for each borough, which was a very successful bid against the DLUC government funding, we similarly bid in the Richmond bid for some space in this facility for Richmond. The Richmond residents would be a minority of the 9, maybe 1 or 2 at any time, and that's reflected. The joint funding package makes this work. So that's the answer on the SSA point. The other point, more generally, if I may, Chair, is that our intention here is to be a good neighbour. So more than happy to take away the point about noisy works, if I can use that term, during those hours. And if, subject to your approval, we proceed to appointed contractors, we will use our best endeavours to make sure that they honour that and do the quieter works during those periods. One other thing on the nursery, as it was raised, we met with the nursery management previously. We've kept in touch with them. And one of the things we did to try and mitigate their concerns is our opening hours are longer than theirs. So we will have what I would call our daytime staff, our professional staff there before they open and after they close. We will appoint, again subject to your approval, a full-time hub manager, and we expect that person to be talking to the nursery manager probably on a daily basis, and trying to develop that good neighbour relationship. So I think, Chair, I've answered most of the points, maybe not all of them.
Thank you indeed.
I appreciate that you've, to use your own words, plagiarised the applications from Lambeth, which of course is a neighbouring borough. But more specifically, since it has been in operation some time, as you say, in Lambeth, have there been complaints about it? Ongoing, since it opened? Ours hasn't opened yet, so we haven't got any complaints. But when it opened in Lambeth, or on an ongoing basis, have there been complaints about the unit?
Thank you, Councillor. I think it's inevitable there will be complaints. This client group is not an easy client group, and that's why we've put the 24/7 cover. So there will have been complaints. They are slightly different. The one, if you ever use Vauxhall Bus Station, it's facing the bus terminus. So overnight, it's a very different environment. But what we are planning here is to have 2 staff on through the night every night. One performing a kind of security concierge role, and the other being a trained rough sleeper support worker. So that will be 2 members of staff to 9 residents. That's not what you get at these other larger hostels. So we think, again, taking that best practice, that we are putting an adequate provision in for that. And if there are complaints, we will deal with them. And what we've said to neighbouring residents, neighbouring businesses, is we, need this to work, and we will not allow, if we put somebody in there who's causing, raising hell with the neighbours or with our staff or with the other residents in the scheme, we will invoke, the eviction process. Because it's not in our interest to see this fail by any measure. There's a lot riding on this for the department and for the council.
Can I got one more contribution? Now, I don't want to go all around this again. At the moment, we've had a very positive discussion, discussing real concerns and being very reasonable. So I don't want to go round and round it. But you haven't, both Councillor White and Councillor Boswell, I think, have not had a go. Councillor White's giving way to Councillor Boswell, I think.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, just I can't hear both at the same time.
Thank you
Come
very
back
much,
to you.
Councillor White. I'm Councillor Sheila Boswell, Tooting Beck Ward. Yes, I'm so pleased to see such a big section on this, on community engagement, because of course we all agree that this is something that is much needed and that we need to do. But obviously when these things come about, they have an impact on the local area, as all planning does. I wanted to ask about the local residents forum. I know it's been covered with quite a lot of questions from particularly Councillor Govindia, but we know that local residents forums on the estates, for example, are notoriously difficult to set up, and it's difficult to get engagement. So I wanted to know a little bit more about how we're going to go about making sure that's successful, that there is some way that businesses will also be able to be included in that, because I know there's a lot of businesses around that area, including local independent ones that are quite community minded. And then finally, it's just a suggestion really, and again thinking about community engagement, perhaps the local residents and businesses might be invited to visit before it opens, so that they can actually come in and see what's inside and what's being offered, because fear of the unknown also can be huge, and when you actually see what's there, it isn't quite such a worry. Thank you very much.
Someone on my left is going to say to me, you've got to distinguish between planning issues and the housing management issues, but just ignoring that particular complaint, it's good we're having an open discussion about it. Any response to that?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to go ahead, Lavender?
Sorry, I was just going to say that in terms of the forum, as Mr. Calder said, we can have a separate condition in terms of that, in terms of getting that secured under its own separate condition, and potentially having further details as to how it's set up and the way businesses will be involved in contributing to that.
Yeah, and just to come in on the forum, that was one of the things that was agreed with Councillor Dickadam at the in-person consultation that happened in December. I know you say about it's potentially hard to get people to attend. That certainly wasn't the feeling that I had when I was at that public consultation. And certainly, just repeating what my colleague was saying before about wanting to be a good neighbour, we essentially want this scheme to be something that the community is proud of in terms of, getting assistance to the most vulnerable people in that specific community. So we certainly want to be able to achieve that by involving the local community. And yeah, I think certainly it's a really good idea to do a tour when it's in a little bit better state than it is right now. But yeah, certainly that would be our idea of doing that, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Councillor Govinda.
So there are some specific points I'd raised in my series of questions, which probably because of the barrage of them, they got forgotten. So one was about the average length of stay. We don't know that.
I think they said 28 days.
Okay. And then the dining and kitchen facilities, whether that is adequate, because 28 days without food or whatever, it's not a prospect, I expect. So there's that side. The other one was the police reference to engagement with street pastors and the drugs team and so on, and whether that's being taken, and whether that's something that, again, could be communicated to the local community about the way in which that's being handled. And the other point about the police reference to physical security, and whether that's been included in the design of the facilities, and whether they are comfortable with that. I know there was kind of general engagement with the inspector, but was that general engagement with the inspector specifically addressing that point or not? I don't know.
Well, perhaps we can have an answer to that, but I thought we'd rather had, to be fair, but try again.
Just in relation to the kitchen and dining facilities, there are only 9 bedrooms there. So we've got a kitchen and we've got a table in the communal space. We're also going to be working with... The updated plans show a bench in the corner that can seat, I think, 5 people. But again, if we wanted to have something where everyone was eating at one time, the communal space would allow that. In terms of food, we certainly want to make things that are sort of the bare essentials, things like clothing, food, that sort of thing, something that people don't have to worry about and think about in those first days of being hopefully assisted off the street. So we would be looking to work with charities on that, and I would also include the local pastors in that thinking as well. Obviously, at the moment, all of our thinking is about getting this project off the ground, and today is a big part of that. From now until when it opens, if given being granted permission today, that would give us essentially between 4 and 5 months to work with partner agencies that are outside of the services that we directly commission at the moment, who are all on board, but certainly the wider third sector, who I think would absolutely have a vital role to play in everything that, all the good that we're hopefully going to be able to do at the scheme.
I think we've had a pretty good council, just as I'm always about to say, and the hand goes up. Go on.
You should always look up, Tony.
Go on.
Try and push on. Notwithstanding, I think the locality issues, it's really good to see that we have a venue that we can provide a housing first, holistic approach to this, which is very successful in getting people off the street. So, there are other areas in the borough, my own ward and wards around it, which do have a lot of rough sleepers, and obviously this is a really good attempt to try and reduce that issue. And also the other aspect around this is a wet shelter, which St Mungo's, who are in Cedars Road, have been calling for something like this for a very, very long time. It's when you have a judgmental approach to people and you exclude people from hostels and hubs because they have alcohol problems, well, they just return to the street, causing more problems on the street and the locality. So another really, really good step in the right direction for Wandsworth. I have 2 homeless hostels, at least 2 hostels in my ward, not run by the council, but they're not allowed to consume intoxicants, and they can be loitering outside, and they can be loitering from a distance outside as well. So could I ask what daytime activities are arranged, and also what arrangements are being made to ensure those people distant from the building, not just outside, but distant to the building, that may go to ensure that they are kept inside. Oh, sorry, not kept inside, but they aren't misbehaving, as it were.
Just before you come back on that, I don't like this one-to-one. It gets too long-winded. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I might be the only member of this committee who's run facilities like this, much larger facilities in the centre of town, but also of about this size down residential streets in a house next door to, ordinary dwellings converted into schemes for about this number of people. And I've asked a lot of questions about it, and I think some of the conditions, including the obscure glazing, so they won't be overlooking into the nursery facility next door are excellent. I think the restrictions on the use of the back garden are also excellent, because I can see that that could create problems between this property and because there is the nursery next door. But I think the points that Councillor White is just making about loitering on the doorstep and people being able to drink and smoke in their own rooms, which was another area that I'd asked some questions about. And I think the issues about the other agencies that are involved to provide support to people, to help them to move on with their life and to remove the sticky label of rough sleeper, which is, applied to people hopefully on a temporary basis who come through the facility. I'd like to hear a bit more about that, because I think it's really important for us to approve this with these conditions applied, knowing that they're going to work. And the other issue, which I'd already asked about, was that the staff are definitely going to be awake at night. They're waking night staff, not doing sleepovers. And the issue about guests and people who are visitors. So guests and visitors can be problematic. And it's really important to know how process is going to be managed. Certainly don't want guests and visitors hanging around on the doorstep, but also some guests and visitors can be exploitative or disruptive, and certainly guests, so-called guests who turn up who are going to potentially exploit vulnerable people is a situation I had to deal with on a number of occasions. So some answers on that, because I think that will make the difference for the people that live there in terms of potential success for the purposes of this facility, and for us to be happy as a planning committee that this facility can open in this location, and that it will be a good decision that we've made. I completely disagree with the idea that you could go through all of this and then review it in 6 months' time. I think that's frankly nonsense. But some answers to those would be very helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Willer, is it always, do people call you just Mr. Weller for short, or is it always Michael? Because we don't do first name terms in the committees.
Oh, I don't think my dad would be happy if he just called me Mr. Weller.
Okay, go on.
So yeah, thank you for raising that. I think just firstly on the point about guests, it's a short stay assessment centre, so guests staying is completely, we feel inappropriate and not really necessary. I think it's the kind of thing that you introduce when you're looking at longer term supported accommodation, perhaps in the daytime, but no, we will be having no guests at all. The way that we've designed the security access is that you would have to enter the first door would have to close, they would have to come across, and then the person on sort of duty would open the second door. So you couldn't have someone sneaking anyone in either. So we've covered all of that on those bases. Thank you for the questions about the smoking and drinking as well. We have consulted with places like the Passage in Westminster and other schemes that do allow that in the rooms, but not in the communal areas. I think because we know that the success of this scheme is very much dependent on what is happening on that quite large pavement area outside the front. Having an option where people don't have to go outside and drink and smoke on the street is actually probably quite a good thing in terms of security and minimising the effect on the local area. And for people that don't drink and don't smoke, the communal areas will all be, you wouldn't be able to do that, but certainly in their rooms. Also for people with alcohol dependencies, it can be quite dangerous to require someone to stop drinking completely. So we wouldn't be encouraging that either.
I think we've had a pretty fair discussion. I think people have made up their minds one way or another. I'm going to put the recommendations now. Understand Councillor Pridham's concerns and those of his residents, but I'm confident from what I've heard that we can make this work and that the officers concerned will be very intent in doing so. So I would certainly strongly support the recommendations. Councillor Humphreys.
Sorry, Chair, just for clarity, voting on the recommendation with those changes to the conditions that we've discussed so far, so making it a separate part for the section on the whys and wherefores, and also the thing about setting up the forum as a formal basis, so we've got those covered off.
Let's be precise for the committee clerk, Democratic Services Officer to go. What are we saying about the conditions as amended exactly?
We'd have an additional condition which had the details of the management plan in a separate condition, which should pick up all of those matters into one document.
You and I can see afterwards. Agreed?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, subject to that, is it agreed? Agreed. Let's have a vote on this, please. Those in favour of the recommendations? 7. And 1 against? 8-1. Thank you. I think that was a very helpful. Councillor Pridham, I hope... I know you previously supported it because I hadn't used it because I think it would be slightly unfair, but you produced a leaflet a few months ago, you and your colleague, saying you supported this initiative coming largely because the government was funding it. So I appreciate, and I'm not inviting you to join in.
I did say that in my speech.
Sorry?
I did mention that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yes, you did in passing. Yeah, that's true. So I appreciate that there'll be... I have been in similar situations in the past myself, so thank you for your attendance. Okay, we'll move on.